Perform to Grow is a performance management process that takes on a coaching philosophy. And when we talk about coaching philosophy, again, we want to demystify this idea of coaching and really just think about it as having regular conversations. And when we talk about regular conversations, we're talking about having conversations that matter, when they matter, in a way that matters. That means if somebody is on my team and their performance matters to me, if somebody's on my team and the results that they are responsible for matters to me, I'm going to be having conversations with them, not to micromanage them, but in order to be able to keep them engaged, in order to be able to make sure they are focused, in order to be able to support them in the delivery of those objectives. And those conversations don't need to take place twice a year in a mandated fashion. Those conversations can be an in-the-moment feedback. You've just walked out of a meeting. Somebody delivered a brilliant presentation and you want to be able to give them feedback. Give them that feedback and give them the feedback in a way that allows them to be clear on what it is you appreciated in order for them to be able to repeat that performance in another environment. You want to be able to give people feedback on the completion of assignments, or if you've received some feedback, whether it is positive or negative from stakeholders, engage with an individual. It is too late to give feedback to somebody at the end of the year. They cannot do anything about it. The purpose of the feedback is to allow an individual, to allow a team the opportunity to work with that feedback, to either do more of something or to do less of something or to course correct if they need to course correct. But what it is doing is it is allowing the individual to have the opportunity to understand how they are performing. You want to give them the opportunity to understand the value that they are contributing. And when we are having those conversations, you're going to be having those conversations around two things. You're going to be having the conversations around them being more and doing more. The conversation, when we talk about being more, we're talking about the value drivers, the strategic value drivers. In other words, how is that person showing up? Remember, that aspect is so important because as an organization, part of our vision is to deliver exceptional client experiences. So how we do what we do is incredibly important. So you will have a conversation and you will give somebody feedback and you will coach them around how they show up and how they are managing and working with your strategic value drivers. The other side of it is you're going to have a conversation with somebody around the do more side. And that speaks particularly to the objective or the deliverable or the work that that person is doing. So that's the practical side of the conversation. Each one, whether it's the be more, the do more, we have to focus on the experience that that person is having, not so that they're feeling warm and fuzzy inside, but the experience is talking to, are they engaged? Are you giving them the feedback in a way that it is compelling and the individual is prepared to work with the feedback that they are receiving? And is it being delivered in such a way that it has the substance? The individual is clear on what you're saying. They're clear on why you're saying it. And they're clear on what needs to be done in order to move forward. So a couple of things to consider when you are going to be having a coaching conversation is, first of all, who are you coaching? And when we're talking about this, we're talking about the return on energy invested here, the return on the effort that you're going to be putting into the conversation. You want to make sure that when you're having the conversation, that you get the result that you're after. So in order to do that, you want to think about who is the individual who needs to receive the feedback. If you're sitting and you're talking to somebody who is a driver, you're going to make sure that when you're having that feedback, you are results orientated, you're quick, you're to the point, you be bold, you be bright, you be gone. You're not going to waste time in reams and reams of data. You're not going to be wasting time with somebody who's a driver with unnecessary details or setting the scene. On the other side of it, if you're going to be speaking to somebody who's, say, more analytical, now here is somebody you're going to have to take the time to talk to about the detail. You're going to probably also have to be able to give that individual the time to be able to process the feedback that they are giving. You're going to have to be logical. You're going to have to be clear. You're going to have to be more deliberate in the way in which you converse with somebody who is analytical, because they are going to ask you for those details. Another aspect to consider here is, what is your intention? And just have a look at this model. And it's a simple model, but it's a very effective model. Is so often when we communicate, our intention may be one thing, but the impact that we have is completely different to what we expected to have. So when you're going to sit down and have a conversation with somebody, be clear on what that intention is. If your intention is to get somebody to change what they are doing, how are you going to go about that? What detail do they need to know? If your intention is to correct somebody's behavior, what is the best approach you need to have with that person in order for them to take on the feedback and to absorb the feedback in such a way that their behavior actually shifts? That again comes back to who's the person that you're talking to. It's going to come back to when and how you're presenting the feedback or having the conversation with that person. So intent versus impact. The idea is to close the gap between that intent and versus the impact. You want the impact to be right on mark, right on target. We don't have time to waste a conversation. We don't have time to give somebody feedback and for them not to be taking that feedback on. So your intention needs to be clear, not only to you, but to the individual that you're talking to. Another aspect to think about here is when you're giving somebody feedback, particularly if the feedback that you're giving them is constructive in the sense of you wanting them to do something different. You're not happy or you're not comfortable with the level of performance that they've delivered. You're probably going to expect some type of resistance. And when we think about this resistance, there's 3 broad levels of resistance. 1, I don't get it. 2, I don't like it. Or 3, I don't like you. So if we're talking about I don't get it, level 1, that's intellectual. We need to think about how to communicate better. We need to think about, is there some information that is missing? What is it that you need to give that person, and how do you need to present that information so that the individual is able to understand, or the team is able to grasp what is expected of them? Level 2, that now starts to become slightly trickier, because now we're talking about the emotional response that somebody is having. It doesn't mean you don't give the feedback, but what it does mean is you may have to give that person an opportunity to work with. You might need to support that person. You might even need to give them some space to just absorb the feedback. But level 2 is an emotional aspect, and you might just need to engage in a dialogue to settle the person down and move them through the uncomfortableness to the place where they are now ready to move forward. Level 3 is slightly more complex. You're dealing with 2 elements. First of all, you're giving somebody feedback. They need to be able to do something differently as a result of that feedback. So we need to be able to manage the here and now. But if the individual does not like you, we not only have to address the here and now, but we also need to start thinking about what needs to happen to repair or to strengthen that relationship going forward. Because inevitably, you're going to have to give that person some feedback once again somewhere in the future. So you don't want to have a constant battle with regards to giving that person feedback. So deal with the here and now, and then realize what is it, and come up with an action, come up with a plan. What is it that needs to be done to make sure that you repair that relationship to a point where it's amicable or to a point where it is at the very least cordial, so that work can be done without any unnecessary resistance. So what does a good conversation sound like? It always has to have context. People need to know why you're giving them feedback. Remember, you may be thinking about it, you understand your why, you understand where that feedback is coming from. If you just launch straight into a conversation, you may have the individual reeling, trying to figure out what it is or why it is or where this feedback is coming from. And if they've gone into their mind to try and figure that out, they're not in the position to actually hear what it is that you have to say. So get and remove that obstacle right out of the gate by giving them some context. Joe, I want to have a conversation with you with regards to X, Y, and Z. Link it to an objective. Giving feedback is intended to help people be more, do more in order to achieve more. You're giving them feedback because the feedback is intended to help them achieve a particular deliverable, help them move towards the strategic objective that you're looking to achieve as a team or as a business unit. When you are giving the feedback, the intention of the feedback is to be constructive. There's no point in giving somebody feedback if you just want to tell them off, because what are you going to do with that? If you are wanting to be able to correct somebody's behavior because it's unacceptable, that's fine. That is necessary. But it needs to be done in such a way that the individual is prepared to take it on and the individual is prepared to do something about that behavior. Focus on the solution. Focusing on where somebody has gone wrong, focusing on where they have missed it, focusing on the problem doesn't get us anywhere. It may just give us a point to begin with, but the conversation will need to shift and the conversation does need to move to a point where you're now focusing on a solution. In other words, what do you want the person to do about it? So let's go back to using our rating scale. If it's time for somebody to step up, what is the solution to them stepping up? What is the action? What is the plan that is going to be put in place so that individual walks out from that conversation clear in their mind, one, of what is expected of them, and two, on how they're going to go about delivering or closing that gap or course correcting in the way that they need to course correct. If we're having a good coaching conversation, you're not telling people what to do. It's not about you giving them instructions. It's about you engaging them. Remember, if we're going to have a high-performing culture, if we're going to have a culture where there is strong engagement, high engagement from the teams around us, we need them participating in that conversation. You also want them participating in that conversation because you want them walking out thinking differently. You want it to be a pitch and catch type of scenario so that they have engaged their resources, they've engaged their thinking, so that they are part of the solution, so that they're able to own their part in what it is that needs to be done. They can own the responsibility that is required of them. And watch the language that you use with people. If you come into a conversation saying you must, you have to, you will, you're going to have somebody on the defense. They're going to be on the back foot. They're going to be thinking about and going into survival mode, and it's going to be natural for them to shut down, to defend, to want to move away from the feedback that is being given to them. So the language needs to be language that draws the person in. Joe, I'm uncomfortable with the behavior that I saw in the meeting. Rather than, Joe, the way that you showed up in that meeting was unacceptable. Change it slightly. I'm uncomfortable. I want to see something done differently. What are you going to do about it? Now we can start actually moving into creating an action plan, creating a conversation where the person participates in the solution, participates in what's happening in order to be able to ensure that the conversation is constructive. Another really nice and simple model for you to use, there's 3 things. If we think about success, what success looks like, what would you want people to know? What would you want people to feel? What would you want them to do? And a great place to begin is with that do piece. In other words, if people were already successful, if we had already achieved our objective, if the shift you were looking for had already taken place, what would that person, what would that team, what would they be doing? What would you be seeing? How would they be engaging? If you can picture that success, now you can go back and say, if they were doing that, what would they need to know and how would they need to feel? In other words, what attitude, what level of engagement we require. And then you would create an action plan around what they need to know and what they need to feel in order to do what that success looks like. This feedback model is a great feedback model. It is simple. Remember, our intent here is to get people to do something differently. So when you're giving somebody feedback, think about the AID feedback model. And it's simply this, 3 things. The A is for what was the action that you observed? I, what impact did that action have? And the D, what do you want them to do differently? Let me give you an example. Somebody comes into a meeting and you're frustrated with their behavior, so you launch into giving them some feedback because feedback is good, feedback is a gift. And you say, John, your attitude in meetings is completely unacceptable. You're disinterested and you're wasting not only my time, but you're wasting everybody else's time. That feedback is not constructive. That feedback is not useful. That feedback actually doesn't say anything other than demonstrating your frustration. So if we use the AID feedback model, you can use it this way. John, when you come into a meeting, the first thing that I'm seeing you doing is you open up your laptop and you start working on your emails. The impact that that has is it makes the rest of us believe that you're not interested, that you have more important things to do. What I'd like you to do differently is don't bring in your laptop. The next time you come into a meeting, leave your laptop out of the room. That way, John is absolutely clear on what it is that is causing the frustration, the impact that it is having, what you require of John next time. The coaching matrix. Another simple cheat sheet here is when you're thinking about coaching, when you're thinking about engaging with your team, you can use the coaching matrix just to focus you and to allow you to know where it is that you need to begin your conversations. And there's 2 continuums that run. There is the vertical continuum, which is the skill continuum, and then there is the will continuum. When we're talking about the skill continuum, let me give you an example. You could have somebody who has high skill and low will. That means you know that that individual is competent, is able, is equipped to do what needs to be done, but for whatever reason, they're not delivering at the level that they should be. So straight away, you know that that means that individual needs to be motivated. So you want to actually identify what are their constraints, what is it that's actually going on, and then you're going to engage that person around trying to increase their willingness or their will level. You could have somebody who is high skill and high will. So straight away, here you have somebody on your team. You've got an individual that you can actually tap into. You've got a resource that is available to you. You may want to delegate to them. Not only that, though, here is somebody who you may want to praise. Remember, if they're high will, high skill, you want to make sure that that person is clear, that person is focused, and that person stays in that mode. So you want to be able to praise them. You want to collaborate with them. You want to engage that individual. And then, of course, you have somebody who is low will and low skill, and that person you're going to take a more directive approach with. So just taking a look at this coaching matrix, just really quickly, you're able to know where to begin and what to begin your conversation around. And of course, what this happens is this is not something that's done only once a year. You can be using this coaching matrix every day. You can be using it every month. You could be using it in a moment just by considering what it is that is going on and just plotting somebody very quickly on that matrix, and straight away you've got focus for your conversation. Another model that we use when we talk about coaching is the GROW model, and this is a model that so many people are familiar with. It is more in depth than the AID feedback model. It is also a really simple but practical way of driving coaching conversations. In the moment coaching conversation, along with that ongoing conversation that you might be having with somebody as you're trying to get them, if perhaps they're making progress and you're trying to get them right on track, you may be using this GROW model to check in with them on different occasions, in order to ensure that the activity and the application is happening the way that it needs to. So let's have a look at the acronym. The G is for goal. What is it that you're wanting to achieve? Where is it that that individual is needing to move to? What is the deliverable? What is the objective that we're working towards? Individuals have to have a clear understanding of what that goal looks like and what it would look like once they've achieved it. Go back into how would we know that that goal has been achieved. Then the R for reality. When we're talking about reality, we're saying, where are we now? Where is that individual now in relation to that goal that needs to be achieved? Because depending on where they are is going to determine what action needs to take place. The reality also starts to talk to not only what the gap is from where am I and where I need to be, but it also starts to look to how the person is feeling in relation to that goal. So you're not only dealing with the skill side of things, but you also will need to be taking a look at the will side of the individual. Then, of course, the reality in relation to the goal, we're going to be saying, well, what's in your way? What obstacles, what is stopping you? In other words, why aren't you at that place that you should be at? Then once we understand what those obstacles are, we're going to come up with, well, what are your options? In other words, what do we need to do to either eliminate that obstacle, move our way around that obstacle, or find an alternative route? Once we've explored those options, then we go to the way forward. What is it that we're actually going to do? And that GROW model is a model that you're going to repeat on every conversation. So then we could start again. So we start with that GROW model with our first coaching conversation. The next time we come back, we're going to start again. We're going to say, last time we were together, we were talking about you achieving X. You were supposed to do A, B, and C. Where are you now in relation to that? What are your obstacles now? What are our options now? What are our way forward? So that just really is a nice practical way of driving a relevant conversation, a relevant action plan, so that individuals are constantly moving forward and constantly moving towards that deliverable.